can now listen to full-length, commercial-free episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast on Patreon. Please sign up at patreon.com/Janice Selby or click the link in the show notes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and religious recovery consultant, and I'm very pleased to have David Teachout with us today. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending a Bible college and receiving a bachelor's in theology and psychology. Spoiler alert, during his studies, he deconverted. Since then, he's been on a journey of appreciating the many nuances of humanity. David has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology, and is currently at work on a doctorate in clinical psychology. Wow. I met David when he was a speaker at the conference on religious trauma earlier this year, and I appreciate him as a colleague. I often send clients to his website, lifeweavings.com, where he has excellent resources on values clarification, among other things. So welcome, David. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Janice. Welcome. Yeah, thank you. This is going to be great.
It is. I would love to hear a little bit more about your background. I always find it so interesting and fun when people deconverted while they were studying theology.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those, it's just thinking about this in preparation for, talking with you. And it's funny at times you think back and it's been a while. Because, the official year of, was 2001. And so, looking at it now, 21 years later, which now I feel a little old. But
me too. Wow. That's a shock.
Yeah, it was a little bit. And so it almost takes on a feel of almost mythology. I mean, it's a weird event. The last time I visited campus, a few years ago, at Grace Bible College, which is where I went. It's now Grace Christian University. They've been growing, which is actually all power to them. One thing I will never say, I deeply appreciated my education there, 100%. And from everything I can gather, they still provide a really good education.
Nice.
And I say that even as I disagree, obviously, with religious points. But they just do. They've got world-class teachers there and really support a lot of their students quite well. So,
wow.
Last time was just weird stepping in because you're in some ways stepping almost into the space of somebody that you don't remember easily, somebody who belonged to a different life. But anyway, I grew up as Christian evangelical, and never really even looked at the term fundamentalist until started studying around 15, 16 years old, then getting into college. I knew deeply in the time, felt that call, so-called, to go into the ministry. It was going to be a pastor. And from the age of about 17, it's like, all right, this is what I'm going to do, and going to build God's kingdom. And that didn't end up working out, certainly by that definition of God at the time. I originally had wanted to attend Moody Bible Institute.
Oh, yeah.
Which definitely would have been a very different life outcome had they accepted me. But they didn't. And, attended a weekend, thing, kind of introduction to, GBC, Grace Bible, and met a few people there that ended up being long-term friends. And I went like, okay, they have a theology program, and let's deal with this. Little did I know that the degree of questioning, the degree of study itself would be the catalyst for leaving it all. So, spoiler, irony alert. And even to this day, I still fiercely advocate, that if you are a believer, to go to a Bible college, go to a religious institution, study, truly look at the various theology systems that exist. The fact that there are different theology systems often is a big shock to most believers.
Yes.
Study the difference between what is biblical theology, systematic theology, historical theology. The fact that those even are distinct methods of study. Really delve into this and see what happens. Because one, just from a historical perspective, I think it's worth studying if that's of any interest to you. But two, I would lay money if I was such a betting man that you are not going to leave those studies at least with the same level of abject certainty, which even if you don't come out the other end of it saying, I'm leaving it all behind, hey, you do you. But that degree of humility that I would hope actually results from it doesn't always exist, but hopefully it would happen, is going to make you a better believer, I think, long term anyway. And one that frankly I'd get along better with day to day.
That's right. Yeah.
And there it is.
So it was studying, was it studying the historicity, or what part of it made you actually step back and go, I don't really think this is the way for me?
Well, yeah, I got involved, for those who really want to geek out about this stuff, I got involved with what is referred to as a mid-Acts dispensationalist theology perspective, and which I didn't know such a thing even exists. I just grew up like, you just studied the Bible, correct? Yeah. And because there was only one, right? And they're all saying the same thing, correct? Yeah, no. So, got introduced to this whole systematic theology thing, mid-Acts dispensationalism, very, very a smaller group of people as far as Christendom is concerned that look through, particular lens. Don't need to get into all the details. That's not the point here. Look it up. Have some fun with it. But also got involved with a King James only movement at the time.
Been there.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, for those who are interested, definitely have fun looking that up. It is it's very interesting. And part of it was because it answered questions. It was a concern around how do you know what you're reading is legit beyond mere faith?
Yes.
How does this actually work in practice? And when you are reading, I don't know Greek. I have a nice little, Greek Hebrew study Bible that can show me a few things and so on. It's like, yeah, it's great. It's interesting. I actually still have it. But, and it's fascinating from a linguistic perspective to take a look at these things. But the vast majority of us are reading from an English or other language perspective, interpretation. And so what are you doing? Well, how is this going to work? And so, in the King James only group, at the very least, attempts to answer it. It says, look, there is a specific textual line that has been preserved by the Almighty that when you pick up this, specific translation, you are getting the actual words of the good Lord. And when you see it, then okay, I can get my theology from this. I can get my truth from this. It is an epistemic principle that you can die on. And the rejoinder, of course, is there are a lot of them, but the rejoinder to this is, well, the essential bits of quote unquote, again, the Bible are still preserved, and it's okay. And so you can understand what it is to be saved and blah, blah, blah from this. Well, of course, the sneaking in there assumption is, well, if the essential bits are, how do you know that what the essential bits are? Wait a minute, you have to tacitly assume that you have some other source that you then can look at and go, yes, here's the perfect source. I can then look at this translation, understand that here's the essential bits that are true. Otherwise, you're just left with, I just think it, and therefore,
and I feel
my
it.
thought.
I feel it. Yeah.
I feel it. Yeah, I feel it. This is legit. And you're like, well, now what? I mean, how does this work? And then, of course, the King James only people are great with, oh my God, the tracks. Oh, you remember tracks? I mean, oh man, that is a lost art. Chick tracks and
chick tracks.
just a lost art.
We had all the Keith and Melody Green tracks. Last Days and Mysteries they were from. Oh boy,
so much fun. I mean, there was a I'm forgetting the guy's name. Peter S. Ruckman. Who I believe is dead. He taught at a Christian university down in Florida for a long time, and avowed. I mean, this was not a nice guy. Very much a bigot. He's just some of the things he thought and taught. But I remember some of the tracks that he would come up with, and it's just like this witches stirring the pot with all these other translation Bibles floating in the soup because they're wanting to bring you away from it. It was like it was so emotionally manipulative and absurd, and I ate it up. I mean, it just like I look back and I go, wow. I mean, just just the silliness, and yet. It was there. It attempted to answer some questions because, particularly from, I was, originally so-called saved, asked Jesus to be my life and that kind of thing. When I was around 13, I wrote a note to my mother, please help pray with me to figure this out. It was very just emotionally, it was amazing. Like, why couldn't it be? And it's just incredible. And so you go through this, but from then forward, some of they really started kind of delving into, reading, at least at the time, what I thought was amazing philosophy, like C.S. Lewis, which isn't in retrospect, but the time was amazing. And, the idea was, well, if this is the truth and therefore questions themselves will consistently and constantly lead one back to this. And you should be able to lift these ideas up to profound criticism. And why should God, omnipotent deity that whatever is, be afraid of this? Why should there be an issue? Why should any other believer have an issue with this? Like, let's really delve into it. And you should come out the other end of these questions and maybe still have some more, but still come down to, right, this is legit. This is how this is going to work. And it didn't, but, and in fact, and that was the whole idea of going, well, I don't believe merely because of belief. I believe because I have litany of rational, or what I referred to at the time, rational, a very different definition of that these days. Yeah. But at the time, a rational idea of like how this works. And so it just kept going. So it was like, hey, here's an answer to it. If that isn't the answer, started getting into much more Christian philosophy and philosophy in general, finding those $10 words. I call them $10 words because of inflation. I think they used to be referred to like $5 words. But anyway, it's just like, have fun with this. And, epistemology and ontology and all these ologies. And you're like, oh, this is fascinating. Isn't this interesting? And it still is, honestly. I'm joking, but because it's fun. But it's consider Catholicism. When some of these things started falling away, like, the answers aren't quite showing up in Protestant evangelicalism. Delved into Catholicism a little bit. Yeah, that didn't go real well. And they answered some things, and there's the entrapments of Catholicism actually are enticing even now. There is a longevity, a sense of ritual to it that is powerful. Still is. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, cathedrals I still look at as being not monuments to God necessarily, but monuments to human imagination and engineering and thought. Like, it really is incredible. And But none of that worked. And then eventually, come across, books like the biggest thing was George H. Smith, his book Atheism: The Case Against God. He, the title alone, basically not leaving anything to the imagination. And so, I remember even the time, like, a good friend, I wanted to read it. And he was like, no, you need to, step back and study a bit more for another year before reading. Oh, okay. So I spent another year, and sure enough, like, took that year, studied more, started delving into science more, became, convinced of the, evolutionary theory, and going, well, how do you square this with Genesis 1? You don't real well, not without delving into Genesis as allegory, in which case that's a slippery slope. And then open up, and within like 50 pages of Smith's book, I was like, oops, crap. I'm not a believer anymore.
So what did you do? Did you have any support? Was there anyone you could talk to while you were still working on your theology degree, and suddenly you find yourself a non-believer?
Yeah, we had a group of fellow students. There were about 4 or 5 of us who, we were we were actually looked at as like, we had a philosophy study group, and we were definitely outsiders amongst the rest of the student body. By then, I'd already shifted from the strict theology program. I mean, it was a Bible college. It's changed now, but then as a Bible college, it's different from a university. But because that designation requires you usually, I don't want to misspeak around others, but usually what it means is that you're actually taking a theology course like every semester. So even though you're not in a theology program, you still end up essentially majoring in theology, because you have to take a class. I mean, it was 400 level courses by the time I was done with the program. I just switched over to basically a liberal arts. They called it interdisciplinary studies, because you don't want to use the term liberal.
That's right.
It's not really the reason, but whatever, it's funny. It was interdisciplinary studies, and basically the focus on psychology. And it was like, okay, well, I'm going to, move over to, studying people, because people created this thing. Now I'm really fascinated. Like, where the hell does this all come from? And so we all continue to meet. There were a couple of us that maintained their belief. All power to them. I actually still maintain, connection, at least on social media with good friend Sam. He's a great guy, has a lovely family. He's a pastor. He went on to continue his program, and got married, has a couple of kids, and fierce, a Star Wars guy. He's great. But it's like you maintain the human connections, and that was what did it. It was the understanding that these other people are in this soup with you and try to figure this stuff out, and willing to admit to our foibles and admit to questions of doubt, and have that space that was non-shame based around this question, because really doubt itself was a shame. It's like you're not supposed to have this. It was a sign of spiritual immaturity to have these level of doubts. And even now I look back and go, had I've been a part of a different movement, a different group, had I had one, probably may have taken more than one at the time, but still, at least one leader step up and go, it's okay to doubt. Here's the humanity that we still can possess while we study these things. I mean, who knows? But I certainly wouldn't have left everything as fast as I did. It maybe eventually would have anyway, but still, it would have been definitely would have been far, further left, humanistic, Christian, and so on. Would have been the one that now fundamentalists look at as, just, Satan's disciples warmed over.
That's right.
But, but who knows? It could have. However, I will say, if people may have noticed the date 2001, that was the date, of course, of 9/11. Of course, we're recording this the day before the anniversary of it, and it was a significant event. It's one of those things where, in our usual stories of like how we came to know Jesus, there's often an emotional moment, and in fact, it's standard. I went to Christian camp my whole life,
Right.
being a lifeguard once. Later on, it's like, okay, going. And there's no question whatsoever is finding it legitimate to have these deep emotional moments that then lead you to, of course, the truth of. And so I have no issue going, 9/11 was a big freaking deal. I mean, broadly speaking, it gave us the so-called hilariously named Four Horsemen with Dawkins and Harris and Dennett and Sonny and Hitchens. I miss that man. But it gave us that. It gave us, but it sent us, a lot of us, on a path of going, okay, wait a minute. So Islam's wrong, right? Like it's wrong. But when you start applying the same questions to it, to then back to Christianity, you're like, not sure how this follows. Like this, it's just a variation of the same answer. Well, if this is wrong over here, why not over here? So that was definitely a pivotal moment. And by November of that year, that was when it was like, it was done. Like I'm no longer, part of this. And, had officially deconverted, which wasn't even a word. But, it is now.
How'd your mom take that? How'd your family and people who knew you as David, the very committed Christian, he's going to be a pastor, he's going to light the world on fire for Jesus, and then all of a sudden, no.
What was it? My senior year, you always have your senior picture in high school and you have to give your little speech writing. You have like 100 words or whatever. And I think I still have my senior yearbook. Maybe not. I think I probably got rid of it eventually. But anyway, but at the time, like, here's my favorite verse. And it was, Philippians 4:10 is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. I may misremembering the number there, but it was that was it. Like, this is the guiding principle of my life. Flat out, black and white on the page. I was wearing, those garish Christian shirts, T-shirts all the time, filled with Bible verses, and I mean, oh my gosh, I was an asshole. Just to be, it was an arrogance brought by an authoritarian belief in one's own ability to find truth, and brought a Bible with you every day to class. Had a problem with science, biology, because you're peddling the evils of evolution and questioning. I mean, I was that guy. I mean, it was not. It was, again, I look back and most of the people in my life now, they're like, "Wow, I'm really glad I didn't know you then." I'm like, "You're no joke." I would have been preaching at you of the evils of your life,
and quite sincerely.
Yeah. See, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, 100% sincere. It is one of the things, one of many, these even now that I look and go around at fellow, and there's this tendency in certain secular circles to almost declare like, well, they're pretending to believe. And I mean, it kind of depends on how you define the term pretend, but but really, no. They're not.
Hook, line, and sinker over here. I believe 100%.
100%. This is not like, it is a fundamental truth of the universe. These things. This is how you determine purpose and meaning and morality and your sense of self.
Yes.
Using that phrase, as longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Like that was not just some quaint little phrase. It was, I need to subject myself to a continual limitation. I am the embodiment of wrong, of evil, of sin in the world in order to be right in any capacity. It must therefore mean that I cease to exist and make room for the healing power of God's forgiveness. Just period. And most people, unless you really grew up in it, don't get it.
That's right.
Don't understand the depth of what that does to you. And for good and ill. And there are even aspects like, hey, I get it. Some people need it at a time. Big believer in do not try to destroy somebody's worldview unless you are willing to have something to take its place. This is not a healthy thing. That's perhaps later in conversation, but yeah, people truly and honestly believe it, and for good reason. Like this is not, this is not like people don't have evidence. In fact, even it's just, of course, the evidence, in my perhaps not so humble opinion, is not legitimately strong enough for the conclusions that they're being applied from. But there's still, okay, I get it. There's stuff there. There's a reason for belief. I just don't think it's strong enough.
So how did Mom
take
exists
it? For people. Yeah. Sorry. Good times for tangents. Not well, and still don't. I think there is a continual, and there's a continual, like, anytime I voice something that's even remotely could be interpreted as religious or conservative, because of course at the time political beliefs and religious beliefs were hand in hand.
Yes.
I mean, it was the time of James Dobson and the moral majority. Focus on the family was the thing during that time. And so, it was, of course, you listen to, Dobson and you listen to Rush Limbaugh. Like, the two of them are the pillars of how you understand the world, right?
Yes,
I mean, of course. Cringe. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, so anytime I even voice anything remotely, there's this, David might be coming back. I'm not. There's just a subtle journey of understanding things are a lot more complicated than one way is the right way, regardless of whether or not it's truth in politics or anything. Things are complicated. One of these days I'm going to get a shirt for that. But, things are just complicated. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hope. I do think that some of it was mitigated by the belief that of eternal security. So despite my avowal against, my soul is still saved, and therefore post-death we'll all be together again. And okay, I mean, but if it helps, fine. That's fine. So
they know what you've told them. Like, they know where you stand, but they choose to still. We just
don't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We do not talk about it, and that is perfectly fine with me. I mean, really, there's any number of topics with anybody that's like, you know what, really, this is not going to be healthy or helpful. And can we build, every relationship has its limits. So how do you do with it? If you're honest about it, you still build on that shared humanity. So I have in some ways a closer relationship with my parents' family in general than I ever did growing up, because it's a little bit more honest. It's certainly more adult, and some of that's just growing up. I mean, seriously, how many of us, eventually go, yeah, I can disagree with some of the things of what they did. Name one person you can't find a disagreement in. So parents and so on are different. But now it's more of a, okay, I get it. I get why and I get why it's still enticing. And so, but what else can we talk about? But I mean, life is so much bigger than these things, which is certainly not a statement that I ever would have made as a believer. So as a constant, and there's the fundamental piece of having left is a recognition that life is bigger than this singular belief or even singular set of beliefs. Life is bigger than that. Our humanity is bigger than that.
Right.
And that's why still studying psychology 20 years later, and have spent entirely too much money on degrees for it. It's because this is still all fascinating and interesting, because you can never delve the depths. I mean, it's just had the thought, it's just like, it's one of those things where at the time when you're studying, your faith, you go, oh, there's always more to study. Well, no, there isn't. Not really. Eventually you get to the end where, well, the answers are still the same every single time. But the irony here is the humanity itself is actually the answer to that initial question. Humanity is the thing that you constantly can never study enough. Humanity is the thing that says there's always more answers to find, and there's always more questions to ask, because to do the whole Sagan route, we are star stuff. And as a consequence, then we never plumb the depths of what it means to figure things out. We're always going, well, I thought, and that wasn't so, in part or in whole.
Yes.
So, and now I'm rhyming. But anyway, it's just, yeah.
I know for me, when I'm talking with clients who are divorcing religion and trying to deal with all this stuff, and they're changing worldview and their relationship with their parents is changing. And I remind them that life is essentially like a huge buffet table with dishes laid out as far as the eye can see. And fundamentalism in any form, but I'm talking about religion here, wants us to starve to death at that buffet table, because our choices become so restricted. And the reality is, if something's not illegal, it's not hurting another person, we can take a bite. We might not like it. We might spit it out, not want to try anymore, but we might want to go back for seconds and thirds and fourths. And it's really about being curious, being able to swap out judgmentalism for curiosity and watch life expand before us. But in fundamentalism, we're so scared of curiosity. And you mentioned doubt earlier, and how it's a sign of immaturity. I've got my air quotes. When you're very entrenched in a religious faith. And it's also considered a sin. You don't want to be like doubting Thomas. So these things can make it really hard for people to be willing to poke their head up and take a look around and give themselves permission to see what's out there. So I really salute you for having the courage to dive deep and look for, well, is there supporting evidence or is there not supporting evidence? Is it all just circular? And then you have to tell your folks, come clean with them. You know what? I'm not going to be a pastor. That's not the direction I'm going. Yeah. And then, so what was the hardest part for you about losing your faith or leaving your faith or divorcing religion?
So really it was the loss. It was the loss of social connection. I mean, the loss of, that immediacy of meaning and purpose. It's the ease, in a sense, of I can look at a world event and immediately put it, maybe not specifically, but generally, into the idea of God's great plan, of the unfolding of revelation, and of course, as every generation of believer thinks, we're always in the end times. So it's like everything has a purpose. Everything has a place. You can tack it on the felt board of God's plan and go, yes, here it is. And that was gone. And it's still certainly 21 years later. I'm going to laugh about that the rest of the day. But 21 years later, I mean, you're still. It's certainly better. But in those first couple of years, especially, it was an emotional cruelty, almost self-cruelty, because you often, and I think part of it is depend on the depth to which you may have brought this into your life. But there was a anger a level of self-recriminating doubt that didn't have a focus in other than just, well, if there's nothing there, it must be me that is an idiot to have gone through this. And the kind of hurtful, the fundamentalist arrogance turned into just a hurtful anger for a time, and was yet again not somebody that was all that great to be around. And of course, and part of it was as well is that despite the fact of having some really great friends at the time, it was not an environment that allowed for too much. I mean, it was a public college. If I come right out and declared, I am not this, odds are I would have been asked to, leave the school. And there was a lot of doubt as a 20-year-old going, well, crap, what do I do now? Like, do these credits transfer? What do I do next? Where do I go next? And there was also a question of, well, I want to finish this up because, wanted to have the idea later of going, no, if later on a believer goes, well, if you'd only stayed in the program, you would have found your answers. Well, I did, and no. So, there's definitely a little bit of of that there. But, there was, but yeah, just that loss of meaning. And so you turn it inward, instead of the rage against the world, that often is a hallmark of particularly fundamentalism. It's instead, well, if there is no Satan, if there is no cosmic plan to fight for, or an insidious one to fight against, all that's left is me. And so you turn all of that, and it's profoundly unhealthy and unhelpful. And thankfully, I had some good friends to see through. But there were any number of probably decisions I made that were not helpful. Thankfully, I was in that group because it wasn't truly destructive. It was just stupid. And got through it for those next couple of years, and left Michigan and came out to Washington State, and just kept exploring and kept studying and kept figuring out, how does this work? But yeah, I did not, in fact, immediately start murdering people, despite the lack of morality, supposedly. That's good. Yeah.
It can be such a time of existential crisis when our entire worldview dissolves and we have no framework left to hang things on. Nothing makes sense anymore. It's the rug is pulled out from under us, and we're just in a free fall. Then why does anything mean anything? Does anything mean nothing? Is, do I have to be living in a certain way? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Am I never going to see my loved ones again? It is such an immense, difficult, challenging time. But for those on the outside who were not raised particularly, or spent, the majority of their life in fundamentalist religious groups, they just say, well, so what? You don't believe in Santa anymore, which is really, yes, I can see where they make that comparison, but that really makes it out to be such a small thing when it's your entire life. It's your identity, your beliefs, everything, but you still have to go to work every day because you still have a mortgage, or you still have bills to pay, or you still have kids that you're raising. And then you're like, oh my God, how am I going to tell this to my kids? I've been teaching them a lie, essentially. So if anyone's watching or listening and they are in that stage of things, I feel it does get better. It takes time. You need to find support, reach out, build supportive secular communities, and do our own research. So you had a group of supportive friends. And then you mentioned Hitchens and some other writers that I think maybe also were helpful for you along your journey.
Very much so. It's still very much delving into further philosophy. Even at the time, it was interesting because, even staying within so-called Christian philosophy, there was, the competing aims of presuppositional philosophy and evidentiary philosophy. And they went after each other. I still actually have a book around why the disparity between somebody like C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, for instance, an evidentiary person and a presuppositionalist, and why, and you read the arguments and going, so you destroyed each other. Where does that leave me? Here are the two tracks for figuring this out, and both of them you end up undermining the other side. So definitely delve into that, and that in and of itself, it's at first it was problematic and emotionally challenging, but there was still, because of that bone deep, I need to figure stuff out. Things need to make sense. Like this, there is the question should lead to a further appreciation of truth and how the universe works and so on. The fact that you could still find some people, even if they were still believers, that were willing to question things enough to even undermine another path towards, their own belief structure, it was still positive in a sense, because there are people out there who still really want to figure this stuff out. Granted, eventually left all of that behind and started delving into a lot of other thinkers, and so we'll see. Yeah, Sam Harris's The End of Faith was definitely a big deal. I think that got published a year after. I think it was 2002. I think when it was initially published. That was a big deal. Kay Nielsen, his Ethics Without God was just incredible at the time. It still is. There's still certain parts of it. Of course, Ayn Rand, because who doesn't at that stage in life, delve into a Rand period? Oh my God. And yeah, good times. But there are some aspects of it that, is hyperbolic and ridiculous as some of her writing is. Yeah. It's still that passion, the deep desire to figure out how everything works, to find a direction. We're like, oh, you mean you can be passionate without deity behind you? Oh, okay. This can happen. This can work. Okay, there's another source. Even if I don't agree fully, there's at least still this idea that truth can be, or questions itself can be intrinsically powerful. The search itself can be its own source of meaning and purpose. So there was this, of course, I'm speaking now, 20 years later, and at the time, in the midst of it, you have no idea what the hell's going on. You're just floundering and railing at the universe. I'm reminded now of there's a Calvin and Hobbes comic, because it is the greatest comic that was ever made. But there's this panel where Calvin is he's shouting at the universe, going, "I mean something. I am important." And then the next panel says, "The speck."
That's right. I remember that one. Oh, yes.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Boy. That's so true. I remember in my own, at one point in my own deconversion, I'm sitting up, everyone else has gone to bed. I'm watching an old black and white war movie, and these prisoners of war have managed to flee a camp, and they're trekking through the jungle, and they're trying to get to safety. And one by one, they're either killed by snipers or starvation, or killed by a poisonous snake bite, all this stuff, and get to a point where there's one survivor left, and he's standing in this field, and he's looking up and shaking his fist at the moon, to God, saying, "I don't even think I believe in you anymore." And the light of the full moon is streaming in my own window on my face. And I looked up at that moon and just crying. I felt that is how I felt. Where do I fit? If God's not really there, what does that mean for me and for my life? And so now you have a thriving practice where you are helping people. Do you see clients from all walks of life, or do you specifically work with those around religious trauma recovery?
Pretty much anybody. I mean, primarily I work with adults, around issues concerning communication, emotional intelligence. But increasingly people with, who are a bit more professional, in that kind of walk of life, who are interested in big questions. Anymore these days, because I don't take insurance, I refer to what I do really as it's kind of a coaching type thing, and it's a philosophical therapy. It's very much it kind of moving into let's admit that we all have a way of viewing the world, including as a therapist. The whole thing of like, the therapist should be a blank slate in front of the client. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, obviously we're not there in that authoritative role to impinge upon or force. At the same time, like, who's kidding who? We all have our perspectives. And I don't shy away from it. I don't necessarily spend all time going, this is what I think. Like, no, this is their journey. But I do know, like, yeah, of course I have an opinion. Like, if there's a look over my face, like, and you pick up on it, like, obviously I have a thought on this. Do I necessarily need to share it every time? Oh God, no.
Right.
But it exists, and I'm not going to lie about that. And it's in some ways people, we're the life equivalent, human equivalent of a car mechanic. We've dedicated our lives to delving into the secrets of human psyche and how this works and so on, to varying degrees of success. And so as a consequence, there's some questions that we might have some further insights into. I think those insights should encourage a greater degree of humility. This is not a replacement fundamentalist class, because I firmly believe there are secular versions of fundamentalism. I think fundamentalism is a basic structure or tendency in humanity. We love authority. Eric Fromm is one of the still top 5 probably thinkers in how I think about the world. And his book, Escape from Freedom, is basically the whole thing of humanity's really terrible at being free. And we are constantly searching for worldviews and systems to, take away the anxiety that is intrinsic to going, I don't know. And we don't like it. Well, yeah. Who does like anxiety? I mean, really, this is not something we pursue. We want to get rid of it. And so we're constantly searching for it. So there are definitely secular versions of that, giving over oneself to and going, thank you. I no longer have to think very much about this. I can just put it in. Finally, like, here it is. And so, I mean, Fromm is there and you have this, and so a lot of people then within therapy are asking for and figuring these things out. And that's where we're trying to help out with. So there's a lot of, book reading and studies and questions around what do we think is so that isn't? Yeah. And how does one contemplate the connection between our emotional lives and our behavior? And how does the idea of, well, if I think it, I must give it weight, right? No, not every thought is legit. Not every thought is the equivalent of any other, and which is contrary fundamentally then to that. You may have seen the look on your face, like, wait, that I remember that. Like it was even Jesus. Like, if you even think about adultery, you have committed adultery. Yeah. Wow.
There's so much unlearning that has to take place when we leave fundamentalism, as we just try and, crack ourselves open as much as we can to new philosophies, new ways of thinking and being. And it is hideously uncomfortable. I feel like I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be comfortable with the fact that I'm going to die. We're all going to die. And that the universe is pretty random. You can do everything right, like air quotes, right. And take all the precautions and everything. And then, life can blow up in your face. Something terrible still can happen. So it's more about what do we do after that? How can we learn about and practice resiliency and keep moving forward as human beings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
It's a
and
lot.
That's ultimately what I end up working with a lot of clients around. And is that, so this happened, how do I deal with it? And in particular, these days, in certain generations, especially, resiliency is never taught anymore. In fact, if anything, it's almost looked at as an evil. Like, right. Do not talk about resiliency. That is not, why aren't you talking about the evils of the world? Well, that sounds familiar. No,
so
I'm not going there again. Yeah. I went there before. I see where this leads. And thinking of the world as evil, it doesn't get us anywhere good, certainly. And it leads to authoritarianism of some some form. And I'm not interested in going there. And so, you nailed it as far as how do we live with a degree of discomfort that is based on, I don't know. I don't. And there will always be the things that we think are true. I mean, gosh, can we even imagine what it was like to be 150 years ago and some of the things that were just, yes, this is true. And now we go, yeah, none of that is. And how many things do we think now, 150 years from now, if we haven't disappeared in nuclear holocaust?
Yes,
are we going to look back and go, oh, how quaint. That was cute that we thought those things. And what does it mean to even be human as we make these technological advances and possibly even figure out, a silicone-based consciousness? I mean, it's just like, how does this all figure out? And that is daunting, and it is destabilizing. And there is no singular answer to any of it. And so that's what I work with people on, is being okay with that. Not ignoring the feelings, not dismissing them, not avoiding them, and yet at the same time, not equating or simplistically considering our thoughts and emotions as intrinsically meaningful.
Yes,
there is the thinker and the thoughts as separate. We can look at them and go, okay, I had this initial assessment that we refer to as emotions, and okay, this is based on a bunch of other, a lot of reasons, but and then I also have these thoughts that are further assessments. But do I need to hold on to them tightly? Do I need to see them? This is why I'm not a cognitive behavioral therapist specifically. It's like thoughts themselves are never wrong; they just are. They're kind of the initial fishing cast into the body of water, going, maybe I'll catch something.
Yeah,
but why beat yourself up if you don't? It's okay. You're going to do it a lot of times, and hopefully eventually you figure out better ways so that you can figure out where to cast the line, and hopefully not killing this metaphor, but I mean you figure out how to do it better. But even then, it's never perfect. It's never a one-to-one thing.
That's right.
And that's okay.
There's this tension where we're working with between the humility of, okay, yes, I don't actually have all the answers, and the anxiety of, oh my God, nobody has all the answers. And that's exactly what, it has people running to conspiracy theories, running to fundamentalist belief systems, because they are desperate to think somebody has the answer. Somebody must know what's going on. And here we are in the middle, trying, hopefully calmly, to just equip people with tools, help them to open up the ways that they think, and encouraging them to take responsibility for their own lives, to embrace their autonomy, because of course fundamentalism does not appreciate those things and doesn't endorse autonomy and thinking for yourself and making your own decisions. So we've covered such a great variety of things today. I'd like to end by asking you if there's anything that's giving you hope today. Things are pretty polarized. There is an awful lot going on in this world. Where do you look for hope, or what's giving you hope?
I still come back to people. People are really, they are both, I'm reminded, suddenly I'm reminded of, Homer Simpson's, thing of like, alcohol, the cause and solution of all of life's problems. And I just substitute humanity in for alcohol. Like, humanity, the cause and solution of all of life's problems. Because it's just there. Like, for every nasty comment and just insane conspiracy theorist on social media, for instance, you can find 100 other adorable cat names and to be silly and stories of people helping out one another and the joys and the creative influences of people being able to build videos and odes to their heroes and declarations of how we help one another. I mean, for all of the errors of text messaging, the fact that we can go now and raise millions for disaster relief by just going, here's a couple bucks. But writ large, over a few million people, like suddenly you've got real money. Like like it's both. It is both. And taking the time to ask these questions and try to figure that out, there's the rub of existence. And we are in this together for good and ill. And I just choose to go, I'm going to look at the good and not removing the ill. So essentially, it's the same philosophy that I teach, trying to be lived. And that is, we do not blind ourselves to the difficulties, but that doesn't mean we don't celebrate the amazing achievements that we've done and are still embarking on. And let's keep going.
Humanity, the beautiful mess that we are.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed picking your brain on these topics and just finding out how you've made it through with divorcing religion. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Janice.
I hope our paths cross again. Take care of yourself. Bye.